maybe it's better that conservatives acknowledge that, in reality, they don't like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They would hate him today, and they hate what he did, and they hate what he stands for. So, I don't talk about Steven Crowder that much, in large part, because I find him very annoying, and very cringe, and very boring. And also, the thrust of his arguments seems to be that he's just kind of racist. I mean, like, it's not just, it's beyond a pattern of behavior at this point. Like, oftentimes, it's not just, like, racial jokes. He'll just, like, be racist, and it's unfunny, and then when his, like, side guys realize they have to laugh, they, like, laugh along with it, because that's what they're paid to do, you know? Remember that, what was that bit with him, like, they're, like, black farmers, and he was, like, laughing at the idea of black people farming, and he was, like, Henleys or whatever. It was some really weird stuff, I don't know. He's done that for his whole career. It's like, yeah, the Hennessy tree. Yeah, the joke is just like non-white people are bad, mostly.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture discriminated against black farmers, but little was done to address the problem.
100 years ago?
Yeah, most happy about the new policy, these people. So, yeah. I'm gonna buy a plow, man!
I'm gonna plant that corn.
Go get a John Deere. Barack Obama, mother, I'm the president of plowing that ad. You.
I thought the lesson...
Yeah, I don't know. Not to mention, like, a lot of his affiliations. Do you guys remember when not only did he have Stefan Molyneux, a Nazi, on his program, he also had Owen Benjamin. But then Owen Benjamin had that weird, like, dumpster fire live stream where he talked about how Adolf Hitler just wanted to clean Germany of the filth. And for that reason, Owen Benjamin got dropped from the network that Crowder was on. But Crowder was like, hey man, you can still come on my thing. I don't really care what else happened. Like, you're still good to go here. I think he actually, after defending Hitler, like, Steven Crowder, like, publicly was like, yeah man, you're still welcome here. You know, so really, anyway, like, I guess we're poisoning the well here, but I guess the point that I'm getting at is that there's not that much. Oh wait, am I talking about Gavin McInnes? I might be talking about Gavin McInnes right now. He did have Owen Benjamin on multiple times. In fact, even having Owen Benjamin host the Crowder Report. Ladder with Crowder, I mean. But maybe he's talking about Gavin McInnes? I don't know. Or is it Owen? Listen, let's just move forward, okay? It's all pretty bad. Oh, so anyway, thank you, Crowder. Anyway, Crowder basically did a YouTube video, and it's like 5 terrible things you didn't know about MLK. And this is just like a little clip reel, but let's work with it. The whole stream is an hour long, and it's boring and unfunny, much like him. He is a failed comedian, after all.
Happy MLK Day, everybody. We work here at Louder with Crowder. We still work. We also, believe it or not, what's this with my headphones? My headphones are a little loud. We also work on Columbus Day.
Ah, well, yes, we don't take any of it.
Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yeah.
And, you know, lot to like about MLK. Prostitutes, crack, and orgies, not amongst them.
No.
Men. But the issue here is if it's going to be a national holiday while you're tearing down statues of people who fought against slavery, like Abraham Lincoln, or even people who freed slaves upon their death, where we're talking about George Washington or Jefferson, then you can't have a statue and you can't have an MLK Jr. Day, because what I'm about to tell you is a lot worse. Speech. And we'll get to the crack whore.
By the way, crack didn't exist back when MLK was murdered, right? Like, I'm pretty sure crack literally didn't exist. It at all. It wasn't a thing that existed at that time. So he's saying crack whores right now because in Crowder's mind, that's a black thing. The cocaine, crack, white, black divide is ingrained in Crowder's head, and crack whore in his head is a racial invective. So he's saying crack whore here, even though crack didn't... That wasn't... Yeah, wasn't a thing.
And we'll get to the orgies. We'll get to all of that, which a lot of you don't know about MLK. 5 things you don't know about MLK. Bet you didn't expect to hear MLK and crack whores.
What?
Today. I have a dream of non-crack whores at a Motel 6.
Nope. No.
I don't think crack existed.
You wouldn't go Motel 6.
I'm probably not.
Listen, even his backup guys, even his quartet over here are like, all right, dial it back. That I don't think crack. Even they said crack doesn't. Yeah, even they say like crack was a thing back then. They're like, like I really like to believe like Crowder is just this like incredibly racist, unfunny fail son. He just makes so much money, like they can just be paid. Like right in their head, they're like, okay, hold on. If I disagree with him, I might get replaced, but I might not be able to find a job after this if I don't say something here. You know, like yeah.
What?
Today. I have a dream of non-crack whores at a Motel 6.
Nope. No.
I don't think crack existed
You wouldn't
then.
go Motel 6.
I'm probably not.
Yeah,
Just
Motel 8.
just whores in general then.
How do you make a statue of that?
Well, it
No.
requires a lot of iron, a lot of smelting.
If you were to come alive today,
Skilled artisans.
if you were to come alive today to his dream, which is what people focus on, he would say, "We're here. This is it. Exactly what I imagined."
Well, no,
We
Why
were
are you
here.
Just
guys-
like that,
and then we
Steven. It'd be Steven Crowder's studio. It's MLK's dream right here. You know, this is exactly what he meant right here. That is. By the way, that is the funniest thing that was said during this live stream. I'm almost certain that right there was very funny, and I'd like to believe the guy who said it knew that it was funny too. Like he's watching like Crowder over there be like, black people, crack, black people, Hennessy tree, you know, and in his head he's like, I can't believe I get paid to do this, and he's like, yeah, this would be MLK's dream right here. See, it's you, Crowder. You know. The thing Crowder said about Jefferson freeing his slaves is actually not true. Jefferson didn't free his slaves, nor his children with the slaves that he raped. Yeah, I don't think that he did. But like, when has truth and reality ever gotten in the way of a Crowder talking point? Yeah.
Then we
No,
went back.
he would say, yeah, exactly. In the 90s, we were here. We
My
got
dream-
there in the 90s.
My dream was never to play the victim card in perpetuity, and that's what we have today.
Well, we also have the next one. So if he were alive today, I mean, he participated in massive orgies, which he would have loved TikTok.
So I think it's actually important to talk about this, okay? So there's been I tweeted about this. First of all, orgies are based, okay? As long as everyone there is consensually present. I don't know what TikTok has to do with it. Okay, so here's the thing, all right? It's important to remember this. There has been a lot of whitewashing of Martin Luther King after his death. The reason for this is because optically, disagreeing with Martin Luther King Jr. is really, really bad, okay? He definitely won the PR war, you know, historically. At the time of MLK's death, he wasn't like the most popular guy, you know. I mean, he was a civil rights leader. They tend to be unpopular. That's what it means to fight for civil rights. Christ was unpopular with the Romans, you know, whatever. Look, it's at the time of his death, he was not thought of favorably. 75% disapproval rating, 63%. I'm getting high disapproval ratings here, though not as high as Congress. Listen, now, in retrospect, basically everyone has to say they like Martin Luther King, whether or not they actually believe it, and whether or not they actually know what he believed in, you know? And in order to best facilitate that process, there has been this effort made to make MLK the most innocuous figure in the world. The idea that a lot of people hold is that Martin Luther King Jr. was like this perfect, like, completely institutional advocate for technical, legal, racial equality. That the only thing Martin Luther King wanted was for the law books to not say you could discriminate. And that when he said, I have a dream, the dream that he had was to live in a world where the law books did not explicitly say you can discriminate. You understand? Now, of course, if you actually read MLK's writings or listen to his speeches or anything, or hell, even listen to the I Have a Dream speech, in which, let's be perfectly clear, he does not say, my dream is that the Civil Rights Act will pass and everything will be fine. He says he dreamt of a world where people are judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. He did not say that world would be achieved the nanosecond legislation was passed through Congress. At no point did he even imply that, but you know, if you read what he wrote and listen to what he said, he was a pretty based dude. He wasn't a perfect guy. Nobody is. Literally nobody. So it feels kind of pointless to bring it up, I guess. But he was... People say that he was a socialist. This is kind of a 50-50 thing. He wasn't a proper socialist the way that Fred Hampton or Malcolm X was. He called himself a socialist at times. He seemed to be very critical of capitalism and an advocate for alternative economic solutions. He also disavowed communism And at times he seemed kind of wishy-washy on the term socialism explicitly. I think it's reasonable to say he probably would have been a classical social democrat. That is to say, the social democrats of the early 20th century in Europe. That is to say, people bordering on reformist socialism to very highly regulated and, like worker-oriented capitalism. That's my guess, but he wasn't like screaming about like workers' revolution, though, of course, when he was killed, he was working in solidarity of striking workers. So, you can take from that what you will. Listen, the point that I'm getting at here is that if you look at what he believed, he would be considered radical today to Republicans and to Democrats. If he was around today, he would be, lambasted as a far left racial agitator. Nothing in the past 60 years has changed to the point that history has outpaced him. He is still ahead of history. He has still outpaced history. History has yet to catch up to him, even after his death. So you have this kind of difficult juxtaposition. How do you, pretend to like Martin Luther King when he so clearly would be the target of racial and economic invectives if he was around today? Well, you lie about what he believed. And that is exactly what Crowder is doing right here. However, I think we're seeing a bit of a critical breaking point. Because the truth is, if Martin Luther King Jr. was around today, he would be despised by the Republicans. Like, let's not play around here, okay? He did not stop with saying that, the Civil Rights Act should be passed. He believed in reparations. He believed that whites needed to better educate themselves on racial issues. He believed that the complacency and apathy of what... In fact, I actually pulled some of these up. If I was less lazy, I would actually cultivate these quotes. But the "Where do we go from here" is, I think, the most important piece of literature that Martin Luther King ever wrote, because he wrote it after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, which means that everything he wrote here is left unaddressed by the passage of that act. We have many words. He was known to write them. Tragic, I know, but please listen to a few of these. Yet the average white person also has a responsibility. He has to resist the impulse to seize upon the rioter as the exclusive villain. He has to rise up with indignation against his own municipal, state, and national governments to demand the necessary reforms be instituted which alone will protect him. If he reserves his resentment only for the Negro, he will be the victim by allowing those who have the greatest culpability to evade responsibility. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention. There is no other answer. Constructive social change will bring certain tranquility. Evasions will merely encourage turmoil. Negroes hold only one key to the double lock of peaceful change. The other is in the hands of the white community. Now, this was written after the Civil Rights Movement was passed. Keep that in mind. Listen. In the days ahead, we must not consider it unpatriotic to raise certain basic questions about our national character. Doesn't that sound interesting? Because it kind of reminds me a bit of critical race theory and the ways in which the term or the accusation that America is fundamentally racist has been considered sort of like an unpatriotic assertion by the right. Whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. Interesting. See, if you listen to a lot of conservatives, MLK comes off as just like this person who just wanted like equality in a very nebulous way. And we have equality in that nebulous way because legal racism no longer exists in an explicit and codified form. So we've won, But of course, MLK wasn't like that. And I understand that I'm patronizing you guys a little bit because you guys know this, don't you? I mean, if you're watching me, you probably know a good bit of this. For instance, the people who are annoyingly insisting that, yes, in fact, there are other leftists on YouTube who have mentioned this historical fact from the 1960s. Thank you for informing me that I'm not the first person to discover this information that was written in a book over a half century ago. There's another one here that I was... oh, here we go. Can chat handle me reading this in its full text, or are we going to cringe? This is why many liberals have fallen into the trap of seeing integration in merely aesthetic terms, where a token number of Negroes add color to white-dominated power structures. They say, our union is integrated from top to bottom. We even have one Negro on the executive board. Or, our neighborhood is making great progress in integrated housing. We now have 2 Negro families. Or, our university has no problem with integration. We have 1 Negro faculty member and even 1 Negro chairman of a department. Does this sound familiar? This sounds very relevant to me. This is literally calling out, tokenism and liberal identity politics. I mean, in good language, I'd say, not just because of the racial slurs. Is this even considered a slur now? I don't know, whatever. But I think that it really cuts to the point of the issue pretty quickly, I'd say. There was another one in here that I was quite fond of. One moment. Oh man, so many of these are good. I wept for my children and all black children who have been denied a knowledge of their heritage. I wept for all white children who, through daily miseducation, are taught the Negro is an irrelevant entity in American society. I wept for all the white parents and teachers who are forced to overlook the fact that the wealth of cultural and technological progress in America is the result of the commonwealth of imploring contributions. It's a very good book. It's a very, very good book. He remembers that with each modest advance, the white population promptly raises the argument that the Negro has come far enough. Each step forward accents an ever-present tendency to backlash. Does that sound familiar to you? It's a good book. And he was a good writer, too. He wasn't just charismatic, in his speeches. He was a remarkably talented writer, I think. That's one of the reasons why the letter from a Birmingham jail is, I think, such a well-cited piece of literature, which they're trying to take away from the curriculums in some of those Republican-controlled states, by the way. Remember? Letter from a Birmingham jail was explicitly some of the stuff that they were trying to remove from the curriculum. And that's the point. By removing this information from the public consciousness, they get to whitewash Martin Luther King. And conservatives get to lay claim to his ideology, even though Martin Luther King would have hated them with every fiber of his being if he was still alive today. MLK is still too radical for America. Far too radical for America. Well, for America, I think America deserves that radicalism. It's disgusting stuff. He is a cool guy, and I've been noticing this shift. I'm going to finish the Crowder bit now. I've been noticing this shift in discourse that I'll address as soon as this clip is done.
Man knows how to party.
Touche.
Man knows how to party.
Just would have loved the talk.
First.
MLK also participated in another orgy in Las Vegas with a friend, a prostitute, and the gospel singer Clara Ward. Oh,
What? It's Las Vegas. Why do we know about this? It's supposed to stay there. Come on.
Well, because she sang about it. Yeah, the gospel was like, oh, happy day.
You'll notice, of course, they're only making him look cooler here, but you'll notice that they're kind of playing to tropes here, aren't they? Now, Crowder is a fan of old-fashioned racism, but to old-fashioned racists, often one of the best ways to delegitimize black people was to... Did you ever see that video by Sean on how there was an old stereotype about black gamblers that were pulled from in the Cuphead game? No, you did not? Oh, it's a good video. To put it simply, how do I put this? The old minstrel shows, the ones where white people would put on shoe shine and silly clothing and dance around and pretend to be black people, they usually made an effort to portray black people in a particular way, usually in an infantilizing, irresponsible way. The goal generally was to make fun of black people by painting them as... I guess it's difficult to describe because this is so like racially codified, but basically like impulsive, immature, dim-witted, and pleasure-obsessed fools. The idea that they were trying to reinforce was that black people needed to be controlled by white people because they weren't responsible enough to dictate their own lives. That was the message. That was the narrative. The idea was that they can't control themselves, so, that kind of justifies everything past. And what Crowder is doing right here is essentially trying to turn his audience's impressions against Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. not with moral arguments, because he's not making moral arguments, but by trying to portray him the same way. Listen to the things that he brought up. Vegas, crack whores, even though crack literally did not exist back then, orgies, prostitution. These are points directly out of the playbook for the stereotype of a dumb, animalistic, pleasure-obsessed, irresponsible fool. And if you take a look at racist minstrelly back around the turn of the century, or if you take a look at the racist invectives thrown at MLK back when Martin Luther King was alive, you'll find that there was a really consistent pattern, not of addressing his real arguments, but of portraying him as exactly that. This is old school racism, folks. This isn't just, we're trying to make MLK look bad. This is, we're trying to do the modern day equivalent of minstrelly. That's hard to say. Minstrelry. We're trying to, delegitimize Martin Luther King by bringing him closer to the racial stereotype that Crowder and a lot of his audience holds. Does that make sense to you guys? How far we've come, huh?
I had sex with MLK. He's like, shut up, bitch, shut up.
Garrett, you're right. The biggest point in all of this
is going on?
that things don't actually stay in Vegas.
Yeah. The next day, he's given a sermon. And of course, as we all know as Christians, we are to keep our mouths silent.
Shut.
As it relates to secrets or events that have happened in Vegas. We have solemnly sworn that it will stay in Vegas. Right, Clara? Right? Bitch, that's right. My soul doesn't feel so. I didn't promise. No money back.
So in addition to being extremely unfunny, which I'm sure we can all agree it is, that's the end of the clip, by the way, I think it's really interesting how they're trying to weaponize some of the characteristics that made Martin Luther King a powerful orator and a powerful public figure, and delegitimize them by associating them with these, like, smears, essentially. So, for example, like, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King was a Christian, and he engaged in a lot of religious speech. But here, the religious speech is just a pretense to let him get away with fucking crack whores, right? I mean, it's a way of, I guess, it's hard for me to project my thoughts directly into your brains, but having seen a lot of old-timey racism while researching modern-day racism, this is more like the former than the latter, Modern-day racism tends to be very implicit. It tends to be very, we live in a meritocracy, so the fact that black people aren't as wealthy as white people means that their culture is bad. It tends to be very, I'm going to misunderstand sociology to my benefit. But old-school racism really is just about, for the most part, it's really just about laughing at black people. That's like the main thing. If you look at how racism used to manifest, minority groups didn't have the social power to meaningfully push back against or invite moral outrage against a lot of the invectives thrown against them. So usually mockery was the main way in which prejudice was born. That's why minstrel shows were, wealthy white people would go and laugh at them. I mean, that sounds like really weird today, but I think that's what Crowder's show is for the most part. I really do think it's essentially a modern-day minstrel show. It's something for people to get together and watch and laugh at essentially a white person's caricature of non-white people, which he does constantly, by the way, like all the time he does this. And the goal is to invite dehumanization and negative political points without ever actually having to directly say them. Martin Luther King, I don't think, like, if we watch the whole live stream, like, I doubt Crowder would ever say, like, Martin Luther King was bad and the civil rights movement was bad. But you don't have to say that if instead, like, your YouTube video is essentially just like this. That's the point. Mockery is the refuge of people with no arguments. You know what I mean? If you don't have an argument to make, I mean, there you go. And the ability to rely on mockery as opposed to making arguments is a way of securing social power. It implies that the arguments are beneath you, that the people that you're arguing against are like beneath your consideration. We do that after all, don't we? There are plenty of political ideas we feel comfortable laughing at rather than mounting serious arguments. But I don't feel that way about, say, civil rights. I take that seriously. But if we're talking about like flat earth, like maybe we could laugh at that. But I think to Steven Crowder, civil rights might be a bit flat earthy. Well, he might actually believe in flat earth. He's crazy enough, so I don't know. Maybe that's not even accurate for him. It's difficult to say. I've been noticing this tendency lately for people to be more honest on the right about their thoughts on MLK. Charlie Kirk did it with me when he said MLK was a mixed bag. They go beyond lying about it. Like, the easy thing, the historical thing to do over the past couple of decades is to pretend that MLK would have agreed with every single thing they had to say and believe, because MLK must have believed in completely, innocuous institutional legal anti-racism. And once you achieve that, everything's fine. But I don't know. And I have to say, maybe it's better that way. Maybe it's better that conservatives act that way. Maybe it's better that conservatives acknowledge that, in reality, they don't like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They would hate him today, and they hate what he did, and they hate what he stands for. Maybe that's actually better. Because the majority of Americans, the vast majority of Americans, I think, do support MLK. And I think the more honest conservatives are forced to be, the less likely they are to find support in the public. The euphemisms are becoming less necessary in their minds, but maybe they're wrong. Maybe they should really shut up and stay quiet about it, you know? The death of the euphemism is something we've talked about before, but I think what we're seeing happen right now is through a number of social factors, QAnon, the internet, radicalization online, people on the far right are getting comfortable, getting more and more explicit with what they really believe, but the public isn't getting more racist. That's the critical thing. Some people, maybe even a majority demographic of Republicans, are getting more comfortable being more explicit with some elements of racism, but the public at large is not moving rightward on racial issues, which means, like, this is probably contributing to a split. They're revealing themselves, and maybe that's for the better. Maybe, in my darkest moments, I think maybe Lee Atwater was describing a negative trend. Maybe it's actually better when the worst people feel comfortable being their worst selves publicly. Is it scary to hear politicians say the N-word with the hard R, like, casually? Yeah, but if they're thinking that but not saying it, aren't they still acting the same way in terms of how they vote or how they sway their audiences or the constituencies? If anything, all it does is cloak their real intentions. The more open and explicit they are, the easier it is to challenge them directly. It's competing fronts. On one hand, them being explicit makes them easy to fight against. The abstraction of racism has proven really difficult to combat. Since the civil rights movement, we have never had a coherent attack on racism in this country. The BLM movement, let's be clear, was not a coherent attack. It was anti-police brutality, and that's good and valid, but we haven't seen anything even close to the strength and the cohesion of the civil rights movement. And that's because it's difficult to attack systems that are racist through abstraction. What would you even attack in the criminal justice system? The very racially biased by outcome criminal justice system. What would you protest against? There's no law that allows for racism explicitly. There's no specific thing. And keep in mind, any system you attack is going to have to be easily explainable and understandable to the average American. Like, sociologically, you can construct strong understandings of these things, but the average person does not have an understanding of sociology. They can't. You're never going to be able to build a movement with the expectation that everyone get on board with you at that level of education. That just doesn't work. So maybe the explicit is a good thing. But on the other hand, the explicit comes with consequences. The more explicit our opposition gets, sure, maybe it's easier to find them out, to attack them, to know what they are, but it also empowers them. It makes them more bold. the more explicit they get, the more likely the lynchings are to start happening again, right? And that's bad. It also gives us something to target, but that's bad. And that's a counterbalance. Sometimes it feels like there are two choices, you know? You have explicit evil, which does real, discernible harm that is horrible, but you have something to fight against. Or you have abstracted evil, which still causes a great deal of harm, but it's very difficult to fight against, you know? If you really want to do the math on it, like in terms of systemic racism, like where are we at right now? What is like do the math on this, okay? 1,000 disproportionate sentencing for black people in California on a third strike versus 3 lynchings done in the Deep South. Can you do the math on that? I can't. I don't know how to. I don't know if you can do the math on that. I don't think there's a way to do the math on that. The 3 lynchings are more horrific. I know they would attract more attention. But thousands of people are sentenced every day. I don't know if there's a way to do the math on that. I have no idea what the outcomes would be. All I know is that whatever direction we head forward, however explicit the opposition is, racism continues to exist, you know? Maybe there are good and bad elements to them becoming more explicit with time. I'll say this much. Whatever direction they choose to go with, we on the left have to be capable of addressing the tactics that they use. Does that make sense? If they become more explicit in their hatred of MLK, we need to be able to respond to that, not just with indignant outrage, but with dedicated and well-crafted criticisms. And on the other hand, if they continue to be covert, if they continue to be, you know, well, I don't know if subtle is the right word, because they're not, but if they try to be, you know, we need to respond to that as well. I hope that makes sense. I understand that I'm rambling a bit here because I really don't have like a strong conclusion to derive from this. I do feel like they're getting more explicit, and I feel like there are ways in which that can be exploited to our advantage, but at the same time, I know that, you know, this is kind of like celebrating the growing clouds because now you know what the weather is going to be tomorrow. Does that make any sense? Like there's uncertainty. Will there be sun? Will there be rain? Will there be snow? And then you see the storm growing and you're like, oh, okay, rain. Well, at least now you know. I guess that's nice.